Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out to our event. My name is Aaron Guest. I'm a Redlands resident and a volunteer with Accelerate Neighborhood Climate Action, better known as ANCA. You already know that. This is actually the kickoff to our winter season series. It's the second year we've been doing this. This is so exciting. A year ago I was sitting in those seats, and now I'm standing here presenting one of these. So very exciting for me, and I'm so happy that I'll be here to share that with you. As you may or may not know, this educational programming is called Resilient Living. Through monthly Resilient Living talks like tonight and how-to workshops, we hope to better equip all of us here in Redlands to face severe climate change and climate action. I think we can all acknowledge these days that climate change is real and it's a major threat to life on Earth and has significant impacts, not only abroad, but here in Redlands. So ANCA and its mission is to build community climate resilience by bringing climate action to the neighborhood level here in Redlands. I think I recently saw that according to a PBS study or publication, the Inland Empire once again ranks as one of the worst in the nation for air quality. And as you may know, on some days we can't even see the hills that are the mountains that are just right here in San Bernardino. So our program tonight is going to be all about CO2. More specifically, we're going to have two esteemed University of Redlands professors who are going to provide the historical, economic context regarding CO2. They're then going to explain the specific role of policy at various levels of society, including local, state, national, and international policy levels. They're also going to explain the connection and latest developments out of the UN and the Climate Change Conference, referred to as COP28. And they're going to break down the implications for all of us. So our speakers are going to explain why this is all so important and what it means in the larger context, but then connect it to assisting us with calculating our own carbon footprint. Because again, the focus is neighborhood level and what we can collectively do to make a meaningful impact in our own lives. Our speakers are going to help us with a carbon calculator and then a Q&A discussion on ways we can reduce our own carbon emissions. So we're so thankful to have as speakers Dr. Greg Thorson and Dr. Valerie Roundtree. Dr. Greg Thorson is a professor of public policy at the University of Redlands, where he specializes in the policy-making process, healthcare policy, and education policy. Dr. Thorson will speak about COP28 and international agreements more broadly from a policy and economic perspective. Then we're going to have Dr. Valerie Roundtree, who's an assistant professor of environmental studies at the University of Redlands, where she teaches courses related to social and environmental issues, especially energy and climate change. Dr. Roundtree will focus on energy and environmental aspects of COP28, including a brief history of various outcomes and missed opportunities. And then together they're going to lead us in an exercise of calculating our own carbon footprint using a carbon calculating tool, and it's going to explain sort of what's needed going forward. So as you see, you're sitting at circular tables. In previous, we had sort of rows. On the desks is a QR code, which we're going to be doing in the second half of the presentation. If you have a smartphone, you can open your camera app and scan it, and it will take you to a link. That link's also written at the bottom if you're just more comfortable pulling out a browser and inserting where you're going to go. One of the other reasons that we're sitting in circles is we're going to do more of an interactive discussion. So we're going to work together to complete the calculators, and then we're going to talk about what it means and what we're going to do about it. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Let me just hit a couple of quick slides. This is tonight's presentation. ANCA's mission is building resilient climate communities. Again, the focus is on neighborhoods, connecting neighbors with neighbors, and what we as Redlanders, I don't know if that's the right term, can do together. This is our vision for a climate resilient community. There may be a copy at each one of your desks. These are basically the ways that we're going to reduce carbon emissions. And if you want to talk to anybody who's involved in ANCA after about these initiatives, there's so much to talk about. Again, tonight's focus is reducing carbon emissions. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our first speaker, Dr. Greg Thorson.
Thank you, Aaron. One-eared microphone, so now I need to know how long my leash is. Good evening, everybody. I'm a professor. I have a short 6-hour lecture. Okay. Delighted that you're here. What a great turnout, and welcome to hear about this important topic. Just going to get this started. Great. At any time, by the way, if you have any questions, Valerie and I both teach at Redlands. Our whole lives are interactive. We don't believe in big lecture halls and big lecture classes, so feel free to ask questions at any time. We also do have a Q&A period a little bit later, plus this fun exercise, right, of actually doing carbon calculators, which we'll be doing, again, with that little QR code, yeah, on your tables. Great, so delighted to be partnering with Valerie. Valerie is actually the environmental specialist of the two of us. She's has serious expertise in education policy and COP. I have more broad-ranging public policy interests, including, like you said, co-directing the brand new Masters of Public Policy that the U of R just started last year. And so we're actually just having our third cohort starting now. Let's jump into it. First of all, nothing that we say, the disclaimers, represents either ANCA, don't worry Linda, or the University of Redlands. These are our views only, so we can be as opinionated and as obnoxious as we want to be, right? Fantastic. ANCA, what an organization, and has great leadership. We've been bringing in forums for quite a while now, about almost a year, right? And a wide variety of speakers. And so part of what I was wanting to do is create a little bit of a context for what you're going to hear tonight. So in the past, and what we're coming in the next year is we're developing out, as part of the CWIG, which is our group that plans these forums, variety of perspectives. Okay, so notice the Viewmaster. How many of you have ever used a Viewmaster? That shows your age, by the way. Sorry. I love this though in class, but I hate about getting older. It's my favorite metaphors that quickly get outdated. But the idea behind ANCA's presentations are that we give you a variety of perspectives. So a lot of times we'll have policy makers, right, who are elected, and they tend to have really great strengths about what's politically viable, what's not, what's the difficulty of actually getting that passed. But there are non-elected policymakers too, people who work for the air quality board for the region that have significant expertise and make policy, but not from an elected perspective. We have topical specialists. We've had people do incredible stuff on like composting, master gardeners. Those are all part of our presentations. And then other community members with great expertise. And so the place is loaded, Redlands is, as you all know, with incredibly talented people. It floors me all the time. Tonight you got a couple of academics, okay? And so, could it be dry? We hope not. But it does tend to be people who read, think, write, teach all day long about this stuff. And so it tends to be a little bit more theoretical, but we hope also really engaging. But we hope then that you'll learn something from a slightly different perspective. So we're kind of that frame of the Viewmaster, and hopefully then you can think about this from a variety of perspectives. None of those is right or wrong, but by going to a series of ANCA events that you can see in the current carbon crisis from a variety of viewpoints. Okay. So, you like my nested Russian eggs? Okay, so here's the big pitch to you tonight, is that, so ANCA presentations frequently, and Linda and I have had this discussion 100 times, we like to focus on individual level behavior. What can I do to affect the environment? What can I do to reduce carbon emissions? Really important, in fact, probably the most important part of this process, but that is shaped by a couple of other wooden eggs on the outside. What technologies are available to us, and then what's the economic and political system that's creating incentives for us to do different things. Okay, that sounds boring, but the goal is here to have you understand that and be interesting so that you can think about these things simultaneously and how we need to take action not just on one, but on all of them, okay? And so that's also dovetails nicely with our COP28. So we kind of start out with this kind of a theoretical position. Seems obvious, but worth reflecting on. Economies are planned. They don't happen by accident, okay? So one of the things that we do is we create a national currency, right? A dollar, and that national currency then we use, think about life without money for just a second. In other words, oh, I need to have a kitchen cabinet done. Can I exchange for you 2 chickens in exchange for having my kitchen cabinets done? That wouldn't work very well, would it? To all have one-on-one exchange of goods and services. So we create currencies. So again, this is not, doesn't happen spontaneously. It doesn't happen by accident. This is the key. These are all planned. Okay? And so then we create policies that stabilize or sometimes destabilize that economy. So right now, you're all aware, we're trying to fight inflation. Why? Because we're trying to stabilize the economy, try to stabilize the dollar. If we let inflation run, the dollar's worth less. It destabilizes our own currency, we all lose with inflation. So, but in addition to that, we create other policies, like tax policies that create winners and losers. We incentivize behaviors all the time. Homeownership, incentivize it by giving deductions, tax deductions for mortgage interest. We're always picking winners and losers to try and incentivize certain types of behaviors. And then we also have regulatory policies that dictate a lot of our lives, okay? So now I'm going to get to the point a lot faster. 2 more principles and then we'll get on to the really fun stuff of why you're here. So one important economic principle then is this externality. So this is like one of the great evils among economists. When we create systems to where someone has an incentive or to do something or to purchase something, but they don't pay for the full cost of their behavior, that produces predictable overconsumption and problems. And that, folks, is kind of the theoretical overarching principle behind most studies of the environment. So if you want to have one takeaway from tonight, it's kind of this externalities problem, and so we're going to try and fix them tonight, but through COP, through state and local and planning as well. So for example, if I'm a farmer, I get paid for my yield, don't I? And so I might use products, though, that have like environmental pollution, that create environmental pollution. If a system is unregulated, it gives me incentives, financial incentives. The system is literally paying me to hurt the environment. You see that? So it might cause groundwater contamination, might cause health impacts if I'm using fertilizers that are damaging. So that's an externality. The person who's planting and using those types of fertilizers are not paying for the true full cost of their behavior. You see that? And as a result then, the costs are being shifted onto other people, and it's going to produce overconsumption. You see that? Because in the absence of that, the price would be a lot higher. If you had to pay for the cost of your bad behavior, it would cost a lot more. So as a result then, this is kind of like why pollution has been incentivized through the industrial era. We have massive amounts of consumption that are happening where we're not paying for the full cost of our behavior. So technically what we don't necessarily want to do is just stop all bad behavior, right? It's that you want to fix the externality. You want to have people pay the full cost of their behaviors, okay? And so that means like in air pollution. If you're emitting air pollution, the people who are polluting should have to pay the full cost of their behavior. So it's not like you should not pollute at all. It's just that if you have a choice as a business owner between like 4 different technologies, you will actively be thinking about how much will it cost me to do different technologies, and I have to account for how much environmental damage it's doing. Okay? And so that's part of that thing. But same thing with water pollution, noise pollution, a smoker, right, who's smoking, and if you're next to that person, they're not paying for your healthcare costs, are they? That's another externality. Many of us are annoyed by that, right? If people want to build stadiums that can create tremendous traffic congestion and need for new roads, they don't have to pay for that naturally, right? So all of those create externalities. And so part of this, as the economists and public policy people think of this, is how do we fix these externalities? How do we change the incentives for people to make the purchasing decisions and incentivize the right thing within a society? Now the reason then that we're like little Russian nest eggs is because if the government is incentivizing, if the economy is incentivizing us to do bad things, people are going to keep doing bad things. Okay? We have to fix both. The people in this room, yeah, you're here out on a night like tonight,
You're trying to see what can we do to fix the world. Beautiful. Your energy, and it makes a difference. So we should not only change though at the individual level, we also should change at the policy level. And some of that though can happen very much at the local level. Some at the regional level, some state level, and we're going to be talking tonight about actually all the levels. When Valerie talks about what happened at COP and what's happened at COP, and I bring in really quickly what's happened at the national level and state level, talk about some local issues, and then talk about how all this can happen together, and then how we need to act to solve this crisis. Okay? So then the final principle before we get into the real great stuff, I was going to say the meat, vegetables, we like vegetables. There you go. Is this rational choice theory. It's central to the economic and behavioral sciences that people do cost-benefit analyses when they're making decisions about how to behave. Okay, so that initially that might sound like, dude, that's like justifying you being selfish. But what it does is it opens up a whole bunch of opportunities for how we can fix these problems. And we'll talk about that with a series of solutions coming up. Okay, so virtually all modern economies feature significant negative externalities, according to public policy folks. This is not controversial. And that these harm the environment. In other words, our system is designed to harm the environment. And unless we actually take action to close those externalities, to correct those externalities, we won't solve the problem. We have to take both individual level action and correct our systems. And we can do that, and we are doing that, okay? And within these economic systems, residents are incentivized to act irresponsibly toward the environment, okay? So if you think about going to the grocery store, think about all the, you see the price tag of a variety of options, but the price of carbon is not built into that, okay? So you might buy produce from all around the world that's being shipped all over the place, and there probably is not a carbon tax being applied to that. We've got folks in the room tonight who want to talk about carbon taxes because it's seen as one of the most effective public policy solutions towards solving climate change. But if you, in other words, we're not paying the full cost of our behavior. Every time you're buying a banana from Argentina, okay, you had a significant amount of carbon that you did by purchasing that. And so this is not just of the elites either. It's literally being aware of what incentives are that we're being incentivized to hurt the environment. And so we have to correct this. Thanks, Aaron. Great. So with all these incentives built in, without having carbon taxes, without having cap and trade, without charging for carbon, without paying for the cost of our environmental damage, guess what? We massively overproduce carbon. We have, holy cow, look at that, the trajectory of that line, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere from 1960 to 2020. Enormous change. You want a little bigger point of view? This is from Antarctic ice core data. Yeah, folks, that's data from over the last 800,000 years, okay? And you can see, look what's happened in this very modern era. We have very effectively pumped enormous amounts of carbon dioxide through industrialization, and through the way that we've structured our economies, it's had the exact predictable effects from an economic perspective. Not surprisingly, as you all know, whoa, that has a little bit of an impact on climate and temperature, doesn't it? It has heated the garbage out of the planet, right? And so now we've already, the last set of data had over 1.4 degrees Celsius change this last year. And so already we're right near the tipping point of where COP28 has tried to urge us all to keep under 1.5. Came in at 1.4 this year, which is like a decade early, by the way, of hitting that target. We're on a steep trajectory of heating the planet up like unforeseen. So, in other words, we have to make changes to the way we structure and incentivize our systems. It's not just individual behavior, although that's really important, but we also have to change the way that we price things, to change systemically at levels as well. Now don't get all despairing on me, okay? I know like a lot of you are watching national news and you're like, various degrees of holes in your sheetrock at home. That's not the point, right? It's like there's a whole bunch of levels of government we'll talk to after Valerie's done that are really are effective at handling conflict, and that we can do things, and a lot of places have. We're going to tell now a story of what's actually happening.
All right, I'm not so good at holding a microphone, so I'll do my best. Okay, so Greg has really nicely set us up for this conversation of why we need international governance. I don't know about previous forums if you've talked about governance versus government. There's no international government, right? So we need governance, another way of governing or making decisions in the absence of a government. So what I have here is a really cool graphic, and I'm going to play it in just a moment. But this is a different perspective of this kind of concept of global pollution, right? Our pollution doesn't stay put. Pollution doesn't understand political boundaries. It'd be great if it did, right? But it doesn't. When we emit it in one place, it affects everything else, right? So the atmosphere is just one of several commons or commonly held areas. We have Antarctica, outer space, international waters and deep oceans, and the atmosphere. And these are areas that people have decided are commonly held or resources that are shared among others. And it's because we can't exclude anybody from them. Everybody shares them, and our pollution in particular does not stay put. Okay, so you'll notice here there's kind of a date down at the bottom, December, so we've got winter in the northern hemisphere. So take a look at that as you watch these changes. Okay, so the red and yellow shows carbon dioxide, blue shows lower levels of carbon dioxide. So we're getting into the winter months here, and you can see it's getting redder in the northern hemisphere. And now this graphic is kind of shifting and showing you the different altitudes, right? This is mostly in the lowest layer of the atmosphere, the troposphere. And so what we can see here is that the northern hemisphere is emitting a lot more carbon dioxide, especially in the winter months, than the southern hemisphere. So there's a seasonal difference and there's a spatial difference here. I really like this graphic, I think it's very cool. Right, so this shows us that the carbon dioxide is being emitted more in some places than others, that it's not staying put. And the figure that Greg showed, I'll come back to it in just a moment, it's the Keeling curve. It's that little curve that kind of zigzags upwards. And what we notice, I'm going to go back just a minute. This one right here, you can see that the trajectory is going upwards, but that there's a little zigzag, right? So there's an uptick in carbon dioxide levels when the northern hemisphere is in the winter. And that's because all of the trees drop their leaves, and it's like all the plants are kind of exhaling this carbon dioxide. And then in the summer, they regrow those leaves and they uptake carbon dioxide and they breathe in. And so we see this little dip in carbon dioxide levels. So that happens because the northern hemisphere has more vegetation. It's got a lot more land mass than the southern hemisphere. So there's spatial variability. On top of that, we're emitting way more in the northern hemisphere in terms of carbon dioxide, methane, and other greenhouse gases than in the south. So we see a lot of spatial and seasonal variability. Okay, so our pollution is not staying put. That's the key to this figure. When we emit in one place, it circulates, it cycles, and moves around the world. I should also mention that carbon dioxide levels are measured at the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii, a remote location, because by the time it gets there, it's pretty well mixed throughout our atmosphere. Right? But it kind of ignores the fact that it's coming from certain places and not others. Okay, and so compounded by climate change, we have other global environmental problems. We've got deforestation, the loss of biodiversity, desertification and the loss of arable lands, or the land that can be used for agriculture to produce food, water and air pollution, plastic pollution and toxic pollution that directly harms human health, among all of these other environmental problems. So these are compounded by, and they compound the impacts of climate change. And all of these things are contributing to decreased ecological resilience, or human resilience. Resilience being the ability to bounce back after a disaster, right? So when there's loss of species, deforestation, that's a big problem. Add to it rising temperatures, and it's an even bigger problem. It becomes really difficult to tackle, and it's really a global problem. And so Greg is going to talk a little bit, I think, about collective action and why this these global problems require collective action, because even though individual choices matter, as a single individual we can't solve the problem on our own. So we have to act collectively. And we have to work within this absence of a government, and hence international agreements like those that come out of the COPs. Okay, so moving forward into the COPs. I'm gonna give a little bit of background. If you have questions, feel free to interrupt or ask me later. I'll try not to be too detailed, but also clear here. Okay, so the Conference of the Parties, otherwise known as a COP, this is an annual meeting. It changes locations. This map here shows the history of where these COPs have taken place. Usually the president of the COP is hosting that COP in their country. Not always. For example, a few years ago, Fiji was the host country, and Fiji had the president of the COP, but they decided to host in Western Europe for ease. Right, so the COP changes locations, and it changes by region. There's 5 regions, the Latin America and Caribbean, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Africa, and Asia Pacific. And so the location rotates among all of these regions. And it does that to try to draw in as many people as possible. What comes out of this is a final agreement that is a consensus-based agreement, and it is non-binding. This year it was almost 200 nations or parties to that COP, so almost every country participates in these discussions. And I have a couple things bolded up here. Consensus, meaning that I would say quotes around consensus. There's no vote taken. And this year, if you followed the COP, you might have heard that when the final discussion came, the president from the United Arab Emirates, he said pretty quickly, it's passed, he signed it, there was a big cheer, and then there was a pause. And then quite a few countries said, well, wait a second, I actually have a problem with that, but it was too late. Right, so it's consensus. Not everybody has equal voice in this. Non-binding, meaning that there's no government, so we can't force anybody to do this. And that's part of what makes this process so slow and so delayed. Here's a very brief history, some of the key points. Some of the significant ones I want to point out: 1997, that was the Kyoto Protocol. And though largely we look at the Kyoto Protocol as a major failure to achieve anything significant, I see it, maybe it's the optimist in me, but I think we had to fail at something, so better than now. So let's get the failure out of the way and then make progress. Maybe we needed to fail once. Paris Agreement in 2015, 2016, so when that took effect. And then all the way up here to 2023, COP28 in Dubai. So this has been happening for a long time, and we've made progress. It's very slow, but because it's a consensus agreement, everybody's got to agree to some extent. And if we think about how long it would take for us to come to an agreement in this room, add 500,000 people to it, right? So it's huge. It's really hard to do. Some of the trends I want to highlight of the COPs over time. They've been criticized in the past for really underrepresenting small island developing states and economically less developed countries. Over time, I think there's been a big push to be more inclusive of diverse voices. This figure just shows the participants by gender. And so we can see that the early COPs had a very low percentage of women participants, and I think critiques of that were we need more female voices. So increasingly, we found it's gone from about 12% women to about 38% women this last year. So a lot of progress. It's not 50%, but we see progress in some of these trends and who gets to speak and how much of a platform they have. So this year, the COP was in the United Arab Emirates, in Dubai, not necessarily known for being the most climate-friendly state. This is one of the major oil producers around the world, and so this was very controversial. On the one hand, there was fear that it was going to be just sort of a showcase of all the glory of Dubai and really kind of an appeasement to the world and saying, yeah, we'll cut fossil fuels. On the other hand, it was seen as being very inclusive of certain interests that have often been excluded from the conversation. This is a map, just to give you an idea of the scale of this event. This was the biggest COP there's been yet. This year there were 198 parties or countries, 100,000 delegates, and 400,000 attendees. So there's a couple zones here. The blue zone is where the delegates can go to actually have the conversations and make the decisions and crank out this agreement. Other attendees are restricted to the green zone where there are more informal conversations and networking. That's where the vendors and industries can go to market their stuff. And this year, there's a lot of critique about how much stuff was being marketed, how many industries representatives there were to say, hey, our oil is greener than their oil, right? So there's a lot of mixed feelings about that. Again, on the one hand, it's including a lot of people who had not previously been involved in this, but on the other hand, it's kind of counter to the purpose of this event. Okay, so I want to highlight a couple outcomes this year. So number one, I think really significant, is the language transitioning away from fossil fuels and energy systems. And they were very careful about the language here, transitioning away from fossil fuels. They did not use the language phasing out. And there's a clear distinction there, right? Transitioning away means that we're going to mostly shift away from this, but we're still going to use it. Phasing out would be we're going to eventually stop using it. So again, I think there's a trade-off. On the one hand, the language is not as strong as we would like, not nearly as strong. On the other hand, I feel like the seriousness with which they take this language is significant, right? If they were just willy-nilly about the language and said, sure, go ahead and put phase out in there, no big deal, we'd say, well, you're not serious about this at all. You're not going to stick to this at all. But they're very careful about the language because it actually does matter a lot. So I actually do see this as some progress. This is the first time that we've had this strong of language, and maybe next year it'll be even stronger. Another key outcome was that methane was really center stage. So methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas. I'm sure you all have heard plenty about that. Over 20 years, it's about 80 times more impactful than carbon dioxide. So in the short term, methane matters a lot. There's a lot of calls for tightening national regulations, reducing subsidies, and incentivizing a push away from methane and natural gas. Closing up methane leakages from natural gas pipelines and fracking sites. So a big push and a lot of attention for that. And then there was a lot of attention to policy making and planning for displacement and planned relocation. This is another trend in the COPs. Early on, it was kind of a focus on mitigation or stopping the causes of climate change. And increasingly, we've found that there's more attention to adaptation. Because early on, there was a fear that if we talk about adaptation, then we won't mitigate. But now we know we have to do both. We can't just do one. So there's increased attention towards the need for adaptation. I think there was still underrepresentation from Pacific Island states, especially the really small developing countries. And unfortunately, there's insufficient contributions to adaptation funds, meaning that a lot of countries have said, yeah, we need an adaptation fund, but they really didn't put forth nearly enough money into that fund. Right now we have in the billions, we really need in the trillions for those funds. Some of the bigger goals: to triple renewable energy deployment by 2050, double energy efficiency by 2050, and become net zero by 2050. And I think these are significant because they give countries a target to go for. And they give them some legitimacy to do that, to say, the whole world is aiming for these same targets. These are important. They may not be as strong as we want, but here they are, and we're all going to go for it. And every country is going to have their own way to do that. They can all do it however they need to, and however they're able, based on their resources, based on their culture and population, and a variety of other factors that are different. There were a lot of technologies listed. Carbon capture and storage was talked about really seriously for the first time, I'd say. Nuclear energy, hydrogen, electric vehicles. So a lot of different technologies are being explored and were discussed. And then one thing I think is also significant is that the agreement really targets energy systems, uses that language, energy systems. It didn't really give very much emphasis on the role of agricultural systems or plastic pollution. So the focus is still very much on how we're producing electricity and how we're powering transportation. So in the future, I'm hoping that there's more attention to agricultural systems, which, if you take into account the transportation of food and all of the equipment used to grow that food, it makes up about 1/3 of our greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a huge portion. Plastic production is another major issue. Not as big in the greenhouse gas emissions component, but very significant in the waste. Okay. closing statement, the president of this year's COP, Al Jaber, made a statement that I thought was really significant. He says, "Friends, here let me sound a word of caution. An agreement is only as good as its implementation. We are what we do, not what we say." I think, surprisingly, this president was seen as quite effective in organizing the event, despite his conflicting interests. And I think that this is really important, right? We can make all the policies we want, but unless we can implement them effectively, they're meaningless, right? Implementation is one of the many ways in which policy can fail. So now we have this broad global policy. It's not binding, we're not required to do it, but a lot of parties signed on to it, a lot of parties participated and take it very seriously, and so now it's our job to carry it out. And we have to do that at all scales. So it's going to come from the national level, but it also has to come from the bottom up. And so pointing to this international agreement is one of the ways in which we can kind of give legitimacy to local action, I think. Some of the missed opportunities, I'll highlight these very quickly. So we need more funding in the Loss and Damages Fund. Equity and justice, once again, kind of took a back seat to some of the interests of larger countries and more economically developed countries. And this language of transitioning away from fossil fuels really leaves a lot of space for expanding these. Kind of the idea that we can continue to use fossil fuels in some places for a while. We don't really need to stop everywhere right now. However, I think the market signal is clear, right? This kind of agreement sends a signal to the market that if you invest in fossil fuels, you'll end up with stranded assets. If you invest in renewables, you're going to be on the right track. So it's a very clear market signal, which is important. Okay, looking forward to next year. Next year's COP. Oh, is that working okay? Okay. Next year's COP is in Azerbaijan. The next UN region is Eastern Europe, and due to the conflicts between Russia and Ukraine, it was really difficult for them to decide on a location because essentially Russia blocked a proposal by almost every country in the Eastern Europe region from hosting. Azerbaijan is one of the few, one of only two, I think, that is in support of Russia's war with Ukraine and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So, very controversial location. But location also matters a lot, and the way that it's run matters a lot. So again, we're including voices that may not otherwise attend or participate. This is one of the birthplaces of oil. And so there's a really interesting history here that I think we can learn a lot from. Yeah, here's a close-up of that area. So it'll take place in Baku, which I think is the capital city, next year. Okay, the last thing I'm going to say here before I pass it back to Greg is that we're talking about kind of two different levels of action, and Greg and I come from different areas, so we tend to use different language. Structure is the recurrent patterned arrangements which influence or limit the choices and opportunities available. So the structure is kind of the big picture in which we work. And I've got a picture over here of a freeway system, right? You may want to walk everywhere, but if you're 30 miles from where you work and there's no public transit, you might have one choice, and that might be to drive. Right? So there's a structure that we're working within. And then there's agency. This is the capacity of individuals to act independently and to make their own free choices. So we're going to end today talking about agency. Greg is going to talk a little bit more about structure. And how do we affect the structure? Because ultimately it's both. It's not one or the other, it's both. We have to take action at the individual level, but we also have to affect structure so that we can make the choices. Okay, and with that, I'm going to pass it back to Greg.
Thank you so much, Valerie. I always learn so much from you. That was great. So we learned a little bit about what happened at the international level. I think it's also good to think about then what's happening at the national and state level, and then kind of leave you with a little bit about, hey, what are some things we can do locally? I have a lot of policymakers in the room, so delighted to see a bunch of you here. But just to kind of tie this together, to have all this working together, the US passed the first major climate bill in 2022. It was called the Inflation Reduction Act, but it was actually our first major significant climate reduction bill. And so it's a very expensive bill, but it also then is estimated to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 30 to 40% below 2005 levels by 2030. That's a pretty good chunk. It's a nice set of progress. So I'll be honest with you, like from my vantage point too, it's like to don't get caught up. Look, this is a huge crisis that we have that's really hurting the planet, but to not feel too much despair. Things are happening at the international level. We are coming together, finding consensus agreements. There'll be more bumps along the road, but there are some major breakthroughs. And so here, that's an enormous breakthrough. And then significant investments in solar, electric vehicles, other clean energy technologies, that middle Russian doll of having technology improve. But again, 30 to 40% reductions below by the year 2030. The US, quite frankly though, has been relatively laggard compared to other countries in addressing climate change issues. California, on their hand, we've been a leader, okay? And so California had set aggressive levels way back in 2006, so that we had set a goal to have 40% below 1990 levels by 2030, okay? Which is a big goal. We'll see how that happens just a little bit later. And then in 2015, we updated that. And let's get 60% of all of our electricity from renewable sources by 2030. And look at that second one, 100% of all electricity, no matter what you plug in, would come from carbon-free sources by 2045. And so that we would have the entire electrical grid, that's actually by 2035, by 2045 would be carbon neutral as a state, okay? And how did we do with those very aggressive targets? We beat them, okay? We actually achieved our target of hitting those 2020 levels by 2020. We did it 6 years early in 2014. So enormous. Good news doesn't get out there as much as bad news. And this is tremendous success through what we did. Some of this is through cap and trade. Other folks are looking at other types of technological solutions. It's a long story. We have a lot to go though. Look at all that dashed line. And that means staying on course, right? And I'll be honest with you, this gets harder. The easiest cuts are actually the easiest on emissions. As you go and get closer and closer to your goal, it gets more and more difficult. You need more investments, more determination as well. But the goal then is to reduce anthropogenic man-made emissions 85% below 1990 levels in 2045 and have a carbon neutral grid by 2035. And so how are we doing? We've reduced greenhouse gas emissions from electrical power by 50% from 2008 to 2020. The grid is now 59% carbon free. And so tremendous kind of progress there as well. And then kind of thinking about what in our region, local. Okay, so first the good news. Is there anyone that thinks like the national political scene is working well and efficiently and democracy is humming along? I love the world that you live in. If you're there, invite me over for a cup of coffee. I'd love to sit in your place. It's terrible, isn't it? And so when we think about our national politics, it's polarized, it is gridlocked, but you know what, folks? That, again, is one level of government, and it has not been the one that's been able to act well. But the other levels, at state levels, there's been a lot of states that have moved forward, including California. There have been regional levels, and ours has been one of them, that's had effective policy successes. And then local levels as well, real opportunities. And so now, that politics and that participation can be much more rewarding. It's not like going into battle with rival teams at the national level. And we should think about this, and what I'm encouraging us to think about at the local level is, have we done everything possible, again, in the way we've got our local economy in Redlands? Have we eliminated our externalities? Or are we still offering financial incentives for doing environmental damage? Okay? So again, not trying to push any buttons here, but just to have us think about these things. And a lot of our neighbors are wrestling with the same questions. Some are close to having breakthroughs. But for example, with our trash collection practices, right? Do we really incentivize producing low levels of consumption, low levels of trash? As you look at your packaging practices for everything you buy, it's pretty jaw-dropping, right? For most of us to think about that. We have one very large container and an enormous size container, right? In terms of that we have for trash collection. Are there alternative models that we would want to do in a great city like Redlands, right? With good political leadership. could we move towards a different model? Because again, the way I'm arguing with you is, we've literally structured pollution, the incentivization of overconsumption of packaging by creating an economic system this way. Okay? So what I'm kind of arguing is it's not good enough just for us to even act locally, to just be individuals. We also have to work, and as good community members, it's not like we have to line up and scream at each other like they do in national politics, but to do it Redland style, and to think about some policies. Other things, regulation of single-use plastics. A lot of you, I'm sure, read the news and shocking at how much microplastics, for example, are in bottled water. If you saw that study that came out last week. And we're just learning more about plastics all the time. And so what can we do? And so we see, like our friends down in Irvine, look at some different kinds of policies there that are very far-reaching, that would look at use of styrofoam by restaurants, use of aluminum water cans by hotels, discouraging use of plastic straws, eliminating or discouraging the release of balloons. There are all things that we can do locally, okay? You don't have to there's nothing we can do with our national government and watch that in the news night after night. There's a whole bunch of things we can work on. Third, changes to water pricing, because again, water is probably our biggest challenge environmentally, or one of them. And look at our water pricing systems, and that's a very complex topic. And even things like local e-bike incentives. A lot of our neighbors have kind of done things like that. Is there a way that we can encourage Metrolink usage by thinking about pairing it with like e-bikes that would make it more of a versatile way so that you wouldn't have to drive to a Metrolink station? And there are a variety of things that we could think about in terms of incentivizing there. So the point that I'm making is then we shouldn't be just simply satisfied with adjusting our individual behavior. We should work for systemic change as well. Doesn't discourage, though, of course, the individual stuff. And so my conclusion then is we have made tremendous breakthroughs. In the consensus-driven world, by the way, and international is really one of the hardest levels. There's not like a structure to where we can punish people as well at the international level. We can threaten not to trade, or we can do all sorts of things. But it's relatively chaotic and anarchical, as we see through a lot of our international politics and policies and conflicts. National level is also really difficult because of the nature of our current climate, which doesn't look like it's going away soon. But every other level, folks, it's waiting for us to do all sorts of creative things. And I pitched to you like one way of thinking about it with this economics and externalities, and let's create individual level incentives to do the right thing. Let's not just say do the right thing, let's also create active incentives to do that. So it'll take breakthroughs at the international, national, state, and local levels, and that will likely produce significant reductions over the next 15 years, but continued adherence, implementation, follow-up is needed, and it will take a combination of all those things to make it happen. Okay? Yes, no, that was right. Okay, sorry. Yeah, and so that's the end of our presentation. Thank you for listening, and now we're excited to Yes, and so right when we're done with these questions and we welcome them, we're excited to have you jump in. We're going to do our own carbon footprint exercise together at your table. Any questions or comments that you want to make to either of us? Yes, please.
Hey, professors. I was just wondering for the COP meetings, I was curious, do the attendees, is there any kind of can anybody be an attendee? Or obviously delegates are representative of their country or region or what so have it, but.
So to be an attendee, I'm not sure the process for that. You do have to register and apply to be an attendee. To be a delegate, there's quite a lengthy process. You have to register your organization, and last I looked, it takes more than a year to do so. So, if University of Redlands were to register as a delegate organization, nobody would be able to be sent from our organization until COP30. So it takes quite a long time to make that happen. But to be an attendee, I think the process is a lot simpler. You don't get to go into the blue zone where you get to be part of the conversations, but yeah, in theory, you could be in Azerbaijan next year if you wanted to.
Valerie, do you know anybody who wants to go?
I know a few people who have gone as students. Yes, he says that because I want to go. It's been a long time desire to go. I was recently reaching out to a few friends and colleagues to see if anybody knows somebody with a registered organization who can hook me up.
In California, there's a nonprofit called the Climate Center, and they are a registered party, and we can take public members to a COP, so get a card from me, I'm on the
Okay.
board.
Let's go, Nate.
It's expensive,
Oh.
you have to pay your own way.
Love the connections, yes, sir.
You talked about individual actions, what about institutional actions? And I'm talking about private institutions like the University of Redlands. Can you comment on what's happening at the U of R relative to climate change?
Yeah, where to start? I think, like many institutions, climate change is seen as a longer-term problem, and the short-term being, financial and a lot of other issues to tackle sooner than climate change. I think institutional changes are really needed because of that structural issue, right? How do we change the structure so that we as individuals can have a lower carbon footprint? We are doing things like investing in solar, so over the next 2 years, we've got 3 areas on campus where we're going to be putting in solar. There's plans for water management, but these things take a long time, and I think I had a student actually do an analysis recently of University of Redlands policies to look for some kind of mention of climate change, and the only mention they found was in a report several years ago by the Sustainability Council. So it's not on the agenda of many institutions, University of Redlands being one of those. Again, these are my opinions, not the University of Redlands.
And I would add a couple other things. To me, there's some distinctions between for-profit and not-for-profit organizations. I do think like a lot of for-profit organizations have made it central to their mission to either set up ESG practices. They certainly have to issue reports to investors for their practices that are related to sustainability and good governance practices that are more inclusive and worker rights and things like that. Because some of this is getting signaled at the international level, and so investors start caring. That's the positive spin on that. The negative spin is in the very short term, it looks like there's been some turn away from ESGs as you follow financial markets. It's kind of disturbing to see what's happening. But I think virtually all organizations, it's now part of the discussion in terms of what is their role going forward, because shareholders know that the world is a-changing, the grid's a-changing. Your mission should reflect the changing direction that every level of policy is advancing, and if you're seen as just having a mission solely of fossil fuels, investors are going to worry about you, that you're actually, your investments are not going to be helpful, and your long-term viability is not going to be good as a shareholder to invest in organizations like that.
I would just add that I think one of our investors is students, and so being more visible about what we're doing in terms of climate change mitigation and sustainability, I think is going to matter to students. I don't think that that's appreciated enough at the university or at most universities. The ones who do really showcase that and really make it a point, I think they see a big boom in enrollment and a lot of students saying, this is where I want to be, this is a forward-thinking institution. So students, the more pressure you can put on your administration, the better, right? They listen to you a lot more than they listen to us.
Now we have the national level of target reducing carbon at certain time, 2050 or something. We have state goal of reducing or make carbon neutral by 35 or 2030. Now, as a city, is it? Please comment on this. Is it applicable to have a city goal at the city level? We're talking about national level, state level, sometimes maybe regional level, but at the city level, does it make sense to have a goal for certain time frame, certain percentage of improvement or reduction?
So at each level, you have to meet that higher level target, but you can go beyond that. So right, we have a national standard for clean air, clean water. California goes above and beyond that, right? We have more aggressive. Redlands can go above and beyond California. And I think it does make sense to, but it depends on how and for who, right? So Redlands might have different needs than another city. We might have different resources. We might have different concerns. So the way that we go about doing that is going to be specific to the city of Redlands and to what's going on here. And I think that that's intentional, right? A policy doesn't tell you how to do it necessarily, but it gives you a target or gives you a goal or says you need to meet this, but you can figure out how to do it that's best for you. So there's a lot of freedom in that. I think the city is doing things right now to meet the state's requirements for city planning, for reducing greenhouse gas emissions on a per capita basis. But going above and beyond that would be smart, especially if we're thinking that eventually we're going to have to be carbon neutral too. There are some things that the city can't do. We can't ban the use of gas-powered cars before the state does, or the sale of those, right? That wouldn't make sense because people just go to another city and buy that car. So there are some policies that really need to be at a certain level, and maybe state or national, but there are other policies that can be local. There can be zoning ordinances, and city planning makes a really big difference. We can change the source of our electricity production. We can decide to get our energy from renewables instead of from fossil fuels. We can manage our water differently. We can, as Greg said, we can change the pricing of water to incentivize things differently. So looking at what are the policies that can be made at a city level is really important, and what are our needs here, right? Water here is quite cheap. I know it may not feel that way, but when you look across the state at how much water costs, Redlands has really cheap water. And it shows in the fact that there's a lot of grass, and a lot of orange groves, and a lot of rose bushes. These are beautiful landscapes, but if it were more expensive, people would use it differently, right? So we can incentivize things differently, and that may not be the thing that we want to do here in Redlands. Yeah.
So therefore, the city as a political entity will need to comply with the state overall objective in terms of the climate action. I would think, since we have this very much awareness and action-related component in this community, would it be nice to think the city can perform better than the state?
Yeah, I agree. And so some policy scientists call that ratchet theory, by the way, where you have a baseline, but you can exceed those levels at your state level and the national levels policies, or at local levels for state level mandates. I do think there's a certain amount of like pride in community, and knowing Redlands, we'd like to be leaders. We prefer not to be laggards on things like the environment, quality of life, the things that we're proud of our community. We want to take care of our environment. We see ourselves as stewards of the environment, and I think we want to do that. So I think, to me, one of the things that we're looking at in ANCA right now too is, and you're welcome all to join us at our monthly meetings. Contact Erin and Linda about that, and Dick. But it would be, for example, to have a group looking at some best practices of our neighbors to what are local ordinances that are changing the structure to disincentivize harm to the environment, or put positively to make improvements to our environment. What are those things that would really help that are being suggested and done by our region?
Just one short response.
We'll have more time at the end.
I promised that I built in some time at the end for further questions and answers, but we want to make sure we get to the activity. And I wanted to build off of what Valerie was saying about how the nation may set certain policy standards, and the state may set some, and Redlands may set some. But where ANCA comes in is we as neighbors and communities can self-determine our own standards. We don't need to wait. And so what I find to be the most powerful is when neighbors come together to decide what is important to them. There's nothing more powerful than neighbors coming and discovering what matters to them. And so what I want to build, let's get a hand to our speakers. Yeah. So I found this presentation to be incredibly helpful, putting a lot of that context together. Because I find sometimes a lot can be lost understanding what the international, national, state, and local policies are and how they all connect. But what I think resonated from Valerie and Greg's presentation is the concepts of agency and structure. And so what we're hoping to do next is develop on the word agency and action. And so I'm just curious, by a show of hand, has anybody ever done an ecological footprint calculator before? Kind of gotten a sense? So I see, wait, keep them up, be proud, you did something cool. All right, so we've got maybe a third of the folks here who are probably self-selecting to already be thinking about this, and only a third have taken the action, the step, to understand where we fit in this larger context and scheme. So the next step is to take this context and try to put it into action, because we don't need to wait for anybody. We as neighbors can come together and do something about it. And what's exciting about this is sort of the first step in understanding where we fit into this. And as you'll see as we go through the quiz, you'll see how you can personally make decisions in your life that will affect how many Earths it takes for us to consist. So I'm going to turn it back over to our speakers who are going to lead us through this exercise. And again, I think, again, ANCA's focus is on action and neighbors coming together. And thinking about how we can, in this context, do things to have the Redlands that we want, the neighborhoods that we want. We don't necessarily have to sacrifice quality of life. It's just a reevaluation of where we exist in this context.
Okay, so this is an eco-footprint exercise. It's not a carbon calculator. So what you're going to come up with is how many Earths would it take to sustain the world's population if everybody lived the way that you do. So there are two versions of this. When you go to the QR code, there should be some at your table. You can also use this one here. There are two versions. One is kind of the simplest, quickest version, and that's what I would encourage you to do tonight, and then you can explore it in more depth at home. So within each question, there's an option to kind of drop down and provide more detailed information. So that'll take a little bit longer. We might just have time for the shorter version. So it's going to ask you questions like, do you own an electric car? Do you have solar panels? How big is your house? So these are fairly simple questions. So we're going to give you, I think it'll take maybe between 5 and 8 minutes or so to do the short version, and then I have a few questions that you all can discuss with those at your table when you're done. So I'm happy to float around and help you out if you're stuck anywhere.
I know you can go in and out that way. I think you can go out, but maybe not back in.
Okay, well, let's see.
You did it.
Yeah, we did it. Thank you.
Run out there and grab my salad.
How do we do this, like that?
You can skip, you should be able to skip if you got to the end. You shouldn't have to do any credit card. I don't know how you got to this page. Where's your quiz? Go back. Okay, so you don't want to activate your account. So I don't know what this is. Access travel by car. How often do you have that?
Yeah, I do too.
And then, yeah, now you're how does it say? How's everybody doing? Got good access out there? All right. Yeah, you know, it's an imprecise tool, it's just a snapshot. You know? How's everybody doing? Are you able to access it okay? Okay, good. How's it going? I think Valerie's saying now got baseline and going through the quiz itself is how it makes you think about that.
That's very interesting. That's a fun thing. I'm sure Valerie's going to ask them to share their results.
I know some of you have come up with a number. Is anybody willing to share their number?
How about we do it this way? Everybody raise your hand. And put your hand down if it's over 20. Put your hand down if it's over 10. Put your hand down if it's over 7. Put your hand down if it's over 5. Put your hand down if it's over 4. Put your hand down if it's over 3.5. Under. Or no, if it's over, put your hand down. We're going to see who's left at the end. If you're over 3.5, put your hand down. If you're over 3, put your hand down. Okay, so somewhere between, I see 3 over here, between 3 and 3.5. You want to share your number? I mean, pretty impressive.
2.2? 3.2. So when I do this in my classes, I often hear a range of about 2 to 9. And often it depends on where the student is evaluating from. Are they thinking in my dorm room now? Am I on college campus where I'm not driving anywhere? Or am I back at home eating steak for dinner every night? So one thing that you can do is you can add the detailed questions or answer those detailed questions. You know, how often are you consuming goods, and some more small grain details. Another thing you can do is you can go back and make adjustments and see what activities seem to influence your ecological footprint the most. So maybe we can just share some ideas right here. So what activities do you think seem to impact your footprint the most significantly? Yeah.
International air travel.
Air travel, it's a big one, right? If you fly more, you're gonna have a much bigger footprint. What else?
I think the ones that are harder to change, like I live in a wood frame house, but
Okay.
I don't have the choice to live in an adobe brick house.
Yeah, so how big
I know
your,
some people do, or straw
Sure.
houses, for example, but.
yeah, and I think that
That's not across the board.
gives us an idea of the gray area between agency and structure, right? We don't all have the same agency. We don't all have the same capacity to make choices that the other people do, right? You might live closer to where you work, you might live closer to a downtown area. That tends to be more expensive, right? So you may or may not have that as a choice, and if you live 5 miles from where you work, maybe walking is not a possibility. And if there's no bus, then public transit is not a possibility, and you might just be stuck driving. And probably you don't have enough money for that brand new electric car, thus you're driving a gas-powered car, right? So in theory, you might have agency over that choice. In actuality, it might be a structural issue that you really don't have a choice over. What else seemed to impact your footprint? Anna? Yeah, the foods that you eat. So the 3 biggest ones that tend to impact your carbon footprint are flying, driving, and your diet. There is the how far did your food travel, but red meat and animal-based products contribute to a huge carbon footprint. So which one of these questions that you answered did you have to pause on? Did you have to think about or think, ooh, I don't like having to answer this way. I wish I could change this, but I can't. Yeah.
The one I didn't like that answer was my gas mileage.
Okay, the gas mileage of your car. Yeah.
Terrible.
Right? Uh-huh.
Well, the energy efficiency of my home. See, we get a letter from Southern California Gas saying, oh, you guys are good citizens. Boy, thanks a lot. We're better off, you're better than your neighbors. But I know that I don't have double pane windows everywhere. I've got 2/3 of the house, the others I've paid for it. I've got a big refrigerator, probably too big, but it's a recent model, so it's an efficient refrigerator. So where does that put me? I don't know.
Well, I'm pretty excited that you look at that letter and you say, I'm not so sure. You're not just like, pat on the back and great, I'm doing awesome, I don't have to do anything else. So I think the fact that you're looking at that with a critical eye is a good thing. Yeah, there's always more that we can do, right? Our appliances matter, our home efficiency matters, and I think this is kind of where that policy can come in to incentivize things like energy efficiency of our homes, energy efficiency of our appliances, but also help you cover the cost of that because that's really expensive. And I will say one more thing about agency, and that is, even though what you do as an individual matters, I would encourage you not to put so much pressure on yourself that you forget that there is a structure there that affects you and that affects your ability to make changes. And put pressure on that structure. Put pressure on your elected officials, on the decision makers, on your community members to join you in action. I think that pressure is what's going to change the structure and make it possible for you to take the actions that you want to take. Anything else anybody wants to share about this exercise?
I was just wondering if there are different calculators that are more specific, because we didn't learn questions about solar or...
There are lots of calculators. So there is a version of this it's probably easier to see on a computer where you can drop down and you can say, I have solar panel, it's this capacity, here's how often I buy socks and underwear. There are questions like that. So there are very detailed questions in this. There are tons of calculators. This is just one that I use in my class that's fairly user-friendly and kind of helps to put into perspective how our affluence affects our carbon footprint, right? So if everybody in the world lived as we did, how many Earths would it take? Well, in this room, somewhere between about 3.5 and 8. A lot. Okay, so with that, I'm going to pass it back to Aaron, and I think he has a few closing statements and announcements.
So let's give a big hand for Greg and Dr. This was a wonderful presentation taking historical, economic, policy context and sort of also applying it to the individual neighborhood level, which again is ANCA's focus. And I have to say I'm really proud to live in Redlands because the city is doing a lot. They were kind enough to purchase for the community the Climate Diet, 50 Simple Ways to Trim Your Carbon Footprint. We have copies here. Each household can take one because, again, we are leaders in thinking about the kind of community that we want. You know, we're not here to sacrifice quality of life. We're here to improve everybody's understanding of where they are and where we fit into this context. And this is a wonderful book to figure out how you can trim your climate diet so maybe you can still take that international vacation. So we've got a couple announcements. The CCL was kind enough to come here. They're going to come up and make an announcement. I'm going to have the ANCA founder and director, Linda, come up and make some announcements. And then I've got a couple slides of upcoming events. So let me just get that up. Who from the CCL is going to be making an announcement? If you'd like to come. And then, where's Linda?
Right here.
Linda, you'll be next.
Thank you very much. My name is Judith Ashton. I'm Redlands resident, and I'm the co-group leader of Citizens Climate Lobby. There's a variety of Citizens Climate Lobby people in the room. If you could all put your hands up. And I'm really happy to be here. Our big goal is to reduce carbon, and our way of doing it is at the national level. We lobby the city of Redlands, and the city of Redlands passed a resolution in, I think, 2019 to put a national resolution sent to you at the government to say putting a fee on carbon and returning the dividend to people. So we call it carbon fee and dividend. I was not prepared to speak tonight, so here we go. On our one pamphlet we have here, it says, "Our solution to climate change, democracy." We are a nonpartisan group, and we lobby our state representatives and our congressional representatives on a regular basis. We have a variety of people in Congress who support us. We almost got a fee on carbon put into the IRA bill, but there was a senator from West Virginia who decided he didn't want it. And so unfortunately we would have it. The carbon fee and dividend it's too complicated to explain immediately and all the details of it, but basically it says put a fee on carbon where it's extracted from wells and from gas and however else you get carbon, and the dividend goes back to the American people. It's a revenue neutral program. It does not add to the national treasury at all. All the money goes back to the regular citizens. Lots of information on the table over here. We have a Redlands chapter. We meet monthly. We would be happy to have any of you join us. We have a student here, Sophia, who's the co-leader of our group, so we're not all over 80,000 years old. And so we think one of our other slogans is political will for a livable world. And so we believe that we all have that agency to make a difference with our members of Congress. We've been lobbying Pete Aguilar ever since he started running for Congress. So we're right in there in the beginning. And now that we have been redistricted in Redlands, we have the member of Congress, Obernolte, and so we're working on him. And his office is up in Hesperia, so we need to, there's no public transportation up there, but we can drive our electric cars and our hybrids up there and lobby him. And if you are interested in any of this, please join us. We also lobby our state legislators, and that's what we do, Citizens Climate Lobby. But we also promote other initiatives that will lead to less carbon. We have a tree initiative we're going on, deregulation in order to be able to quickly build transmission lines to move the electricity from renewable energy across the country. And that's it.
Thank you very much. Linda, for final announcements.
Okay.
It's in the slides.
Okay. Hi, everybody. One thing I really want to say is that we are having, what's that?
When you're ready for the every slide.
Oh, okay. All right. Yes. We are so proud and happy to be presenting a program at the ESRI Forum on February 6th. And it's a great follow-up to what we had tonight. And it's two more excellent University of Redlands professors who will be delivering the talks. And it's going to be what has really happened with the climate in the last year and a half. It has been an extraordinary time, and it's going to bring us up to date on that. And then secondly, we're going to talk about the economics of climate change, which is a critical issue for everybody to be tuned into. So hope you put February 6th on your calendar. The forums start there at 5:30. And then I also want to say a word. I'm so, whoops, where'd it go? I bet I inadvertently hit something there. Okay, let me go to this next. This is something I'm very proud of. As you know, we are all about creating community climate resilience from the bottom up, from neighborhood by neighborhood. And so we did our first, what we call a neighborhood forum, happened to be in my neighborhood, which is the neighborhood bordered by Brookside and Center Street. And so we named our neighborhood Centerbrook. We are now the Centerbrook neighborhood. And it was a great event, it was well attended, and we came up with three different projects that we're now working on. We're going to do 10 pollinator gardens in our little neighborhood, and that will help with the biodiversity. We're going to encourage a walkable community by promoting our neighborhood using our local businesses, which we have a number of them in our neighborhood. And we're going to be developing disaster preparedness plans for every street in our neighborhood. So we're very excited about that. And there's information over there about how you can get your neighborhood involved. We really encourage you to do that. There's just no time to lose in getting a lot of these things in place. And then the other thing was, I wanted to mention Earth Day. Earth Day is coming up, yes. April 20th this year. It will be our second annual day of climate action. And we're hoping this year to have even more projects than we had last year. How many of you participated last year? Oh, quite a few of you. Okay. So I don't have time to really explain it all, but think about getting together with bringing together friends or neighbors or a group you belong to and hosting some kind of a project that relates to caring and healing the earth. And there's lots of ideas on a flyer over here and on our website that you can check that out. So that is happening very soon, and I think that was always something to comment on. Is that right? Thank you so much.
The final announcements are, again, this is our winter series for Resilient Living. Our next community educational event is going to be February 21st. Similar setup, it'll be here. It'll be how vulnerable is our food supply, the impact of vulnerable fly. If you want a little preview or learn the specifics, talk to Linda. You'll also see on the tables there's a little how do we do questionnaire. Give us feedback. You know, we do these for the community, so getting information about what the community is interested in and how we can make these educational programs better is always much appreciated. So thank you again, everyone, for coming out. This is a great event. Really appreciate you.